She doesn't belong here, someone whispered, just loud enough for the entire hall to hear. And the laughter that followed spread like wildfire across the marble floors of Blackthorn Palace, as Elena Whitmore stood frozen beneath the towering chandeliers, the weight of 100 judging eyes pressing against her skin like cold air on a winter night. Her fingers tightening around the thin fabric of her pale blue dress, now stained with a splash of red wine that hadn't been there moments ago. The evidence of someone else's carelessness or cruelty, she couldn't even tell anymore. And yet she didn't move, didn't react the way they expected, because reacting would only feed them more, would only confirm what they already believed, that she was weak, that she was nothing, that she was a mistake allowed into a room meant for women stronger, louder, more worthy. The chosen brides of the Northern Territories gathered under one roof to be seen, to be desired, to be claimed by the most powerful. Alpha alive, King Lucian Blackthorn, whose very name carried the weight of storms and silence, whose presence could still a room without a single word spoken, and somewhere beyond the sea of silk and jewels and quiet cruelty, he sat upon his elevated throne, watching, always watching, though Elena kept her gaze lowered, not out of submission, but because she had learned long ago that meeting the eyes of those who looked down on her only invited more pain, more attention she had no armor against. And so she breathed slowly, counting each inhale as if it could anchor her. 1, 2, 3, steady, steady, even as another voice cut through the air, sharper this time. Did they run out of real brides? Or is this some kind of joke? Followed by a ripple of amusement that echoed off the high ceilings, and still she said nothing, because she had been invisible her entire life. And invisibility, she had learned, could be a kind of shield if you held it tightly enough. But then a small sound broke through the noise, softer than the laughter, closer, a quiet intake of breath from a young servant girl at her side, who had just brushed against a shard of broken glass from the fallen wine goblet, her hand trembling as a thin line of red appeared across her palm. And without thinking, without hesitation, Elena moved, dropping to her knees despite the gasps it drew, ignoring the way the fabric of her dress gathered on the polished floor as she reached for the girl's hand, her own fingers gentle, steady, pressing lightly to stop the bleeding. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible beneath the hum of the crowd. But the girl stilled, her breathing easing as if Elena's touch carried something unseen, something quiet and warm that settled the panic before it could bloom. And for a moment the world narrowed to that single point of contact, to the simple act of care that no one else had bothered to offer, not in a room built on power and appearances, not in a place where kindness was mistaken for weakness. And perhaps that was why no one noticed at first, no one except the man seated above them all, whose silver gaze had shifted, just slightly, just enough to catch the movement others dismissed. And though Elena could not feel it yet, could not see the way the air itself seemed to tighten in response, something had changed in that instant, something subtle but irreversible. Because in a hall where everyone was trying to be chosen, she was the only one who had not tried at all, and somewhere between the echo of laughter and the quiet of her breath, the Alpha King began to pay attention. The servant girl's trembling slowed beneath Elena's touch, her breathing evening out as if the panic had been gently pulled from her chest. And when Elena finally released her hand, the girl looked up with wide, grateful eyes that did not carry judgment or mockery, only quiet relief. And for a fleeting second, it felt like the noise of the grand hall had faded into something distant and unimportant. But that illusion shattered the moment Elena rose to her feet and the weight of the room returned, heavier now, sharper, as if her small act had somehow made her more visible, more exposed. And the whispers began again, softer but more pointed. "Look at her, playing healer," someone murmured, followed by a low chuckle. "Maybe she thinks kindness will win her a crown." And Elena felt the familiar heat rise to her cheeks, not from anger but from the exhausting awareness of being misunderstood, of knowing that anything gentle in a place like this would always be twisted into weakness. And yet she kept her chin level, her shoulders steady, because she had learned that dignity did not come from how others saw her, but from how she chose to stand when they looked. And across the hall, unnoticed by most, a pair of silver eyes had not moved, had not blinked, had not looked away since the moment she knelt, King Lucian Blackthorn sat still upon his throne, but something in his posture had shifted, something subtle that only those closest to power might have sensed, a tightening in the air, a quiet pull like the first sign of a storm gathering far beyond the horizon. His gaze fixed not on the women adorned in gold and confidence who had spent the evening drawing attention, but on the one who had not asked for it. And as the master of ceremonies stepped forward once more, his voice rising above the hum of conversation, calling names one by one, each bride stepping forward with practiced grace, offering rehearsed smiles and carefully measured words, Elena felt her heartbeat begin to change, not faster, not louder, but different, as if something deep within her was stirring in response to a presence she had not yet dared to acknowledge. And when another name was called and applause followed, she realized with a quiet jolt that the list was growing shorter, that soon there would be no one left to stand between her and the moment she had hoped to avoid entirely. Her fingers brushing lightly against the fabric of her dress as if grounding herself, the faint stain of wine still visible, a reminder of where she stood in the eyes of everyone around her. And yet beneath that surface, beneath the doubt and the whispers and the careful stillness she had built around herself, there was something else, something older, quieter, a strength that did not need to be seen to exist. And it was that quiet strength that kept her from shrinking when the master of ceremonies paused, glanced down at the final name, and spoke it clearly into the charged silence. Elena Whitmore, and for a heartbeat, no one moved, as if the room itself needed a moment to register the absurdity of it. The weakest bride, the afterthought, being called to stand before the Alpha King, and then the murmurs returned, sharper now, edged with anticipation, waiting for her to falter, to prove them right. But Elena did not look at them, did not let their expectations shape her steps as she moved forward, each one measured, steady against the polished floor, the distance to the throne stretching longer than it should have, the air growing heavier with every inch, until finally she stood at the base of the raised platform, and for the first time that night, she lifted her gaze, not in defiance, not in challenge, but in quiet acceptance of whatever would come next. And the moment her eyes met his, something unseen seemed to shift between them, subtle yet undeniable, like a thread pulled taut across a distance no one else could perceive. And in that silence, King Lucian Blackthorn did not speak, did not gesture, did not look away, because for reasons he had not yet named, he could not. The silence stretched longer than it should have, long enough for the air in the hall to grow thick with confusion and curiosity, because this was not how it was supposed to go, not for someone like her, not for the girl they had already dismissed before she even took her first step forward. And yet King Lucian Blackthorn remained still, his silver eyes locked onto Elena as if the rest of the world had faded into something distant and unimportant. And Elena felt it, that weight of attention, not sharp like the judgment of the crowd, but steady, deliberate, almost searching, as though he was trying to understand something that refused to be easily defined. And for a brief moment her instinct told her to lower her gaze, to retreat back into the quiet invisibility that had protected her for so long. But something within her resisted, something quiet and unyielding that held her there, meeting his gaze without challenge, without fear, simply present in a way she had never allowed herself to be before. And it was that stillness, that absence of performance, that made the difference, because every other bride had tried to impress him, had tried to become something more than they were in order to be chosen. But Elena stood exactly as she was, unadorned by false confidence, untouched by expectation. And in that honesty, there was something that did not fit the patterns he had seen 100 times before, something that did not bend or break under pressure. And the master of ceremonies shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them as if waiting for the king to speak, to dismiss her, to move on. But the words did not come, and the murmurs in the crowd began to rise again, uncertain now, threaded with unease rather than amusement, because they could feel it too, that something had shifted in a way they could not control. And then, slowly, deliberately, King Lucian moved, not with sudden force but with a quiet inevitability that drew every eye in the room. He rose from his throne, the motion alone enough to silence the hall completely, conversations cutting off mid-sentence, breaths held without thought, because the Alpha King did not stand without reason. and certainly not for someone they had already decided did not matter. And yet he stepped forward, one measured step at a time, descending from the raised platform, his presence filling the space with a quiet authority that needed no announcement. And Elena felt her heartbeat shift again, not racing, not panicked, but deeper, heavier, as if something within her was responding to him in a language she did not yet understand. And when he reached the final step, he did not stop at a distance, did not keep the formal space expected of him. Instead, he closed it, standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint lines of thought in his expression, the subtle narrowing of his eyes, as if he was listening to something no one else could hear. And the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable rejection, the polite dismissal that would restore order to the world they understood. But it did not come, because for the first time that night, King Lucian Blackthorn spoke, his voice low and steady, carrying through the silence without effort. "Look at me." And it was not a command filled with dominance, not the kind that forced obedience, but something quieter, something that asked rather than demanded. And Elena, who had spent her life avoiding the weight of others' expectations, found herself responding without hesitation, lifting her chin just slightly, allowing him to see her fully, not the version shaped by whispers and judgment, but the truth of who she was. And in that moment, something unseen between them tightened, undeniable now, and though the crowd could not name it, they could feel it, the shift from curiosity to something far more dangerous, because whatever the Alpha King had found in the weakest bride in the hall, he had not looked away. Elena held his gaze, and for the first time in her life, she did not feel small beneath someone else's attention. She felt seen, not in the way the crowd saw her, as something lacking, something easy to dismiss, but in a way that reached deeper, as if King Lucian was looking past every label ever placed on her and searching for something that only he could sense. And the longer the silence stretched between them, the more it unsettled the room, because this was no longer a moment of polite evaluation. It was something else entirely, something that did not follow the rules they all understood. And a ripple of discomfort moved through the gathered nobles, subtle at first, then sharper as whispers began to form again. "What is he doing?" someone murmured. "Why is he still standing there?" Another voice followed, edged with disbelief. But neither of them moved. Neither of them broke the moment. And then, slowly, as if testing the truth of something invisible, King Lucian lifted his hand, not abruptly, not with force, but with a deliberate calm that drew every eye to the motion. And Elena felt her breath catch, not from fear, but from the quiet intensity of it, the way the space between them seemed to narrow without him taking another step. And when his fingers reached her chin, the touch was light, almost careful, guiding rather than commanding, tilting her face just enough so that the full light of the chandeliers fell across her features, revealing every detail she had spent years trying to hide from judgment, the faint uncertainty in her eyes, the quiet strength beneath it, the absence of any practiced charm. And the room seemed to lean in, waiting for the moment he would find fault, for the instant he would let go and step back, restoring the balance they all expected. But his hand did not fall away, and his expression did not harden. Instead, something shifted behind his eyes, something deeper, something that spoke of recognition rather than rejection. And Elena felt it before she understood it, a strange warmth that spread from the point of contact, not overwhelming, not consuming, but steady, grounding, as if something within her was responding to him without her permission. And it frightened her, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt unfamiliar, because nothing in her life had ever been this certain, this immediate. And around them the silence had become absolute. No laughter, no whispers, only the sound of held breath and the faint echo of a heartbeat that no one else could hear. And when King Lucian finally spoke again, his voice was softer than before, yet it carried through the hall with undeniable clarity. "You do not try to impress me," he said, not as an accusation, but as an observation. And Elena's lips parted slightly as if to answer, but no words came, because she had never been asked a question like that, never been given the space to respond honestly without consequence. And for a moment she considered, lowering her gaze, retreating into the safety of silence. But something in his expression stopped her, something that told her he was not asking to judge her, but to understand her. and so she answered in the only way she knew how, her voice quiet but steady. I did not think I needed to. And the simplicity of it, the absence of pretense, settled over the space between them like a truth that could not be ignored. And in that moment, something inside King Lucian shifted completely, because for the first time that night, he was not looking at a candidate, not evaluating a bride. He was looking at her, and the realization did not bring clarity. It brought something far more dangerous, something he could not control. And for a man who had built his rule on control above all else, that alone was enough to change everything. The words lingered between them, simple and unguarded, yet they carried a weight that no carefully rehearsed answer in the room could match. And for a moment King Lucian did not respond, not because he had nothing to say, but because something in her honesty had disrupted the careful balance he had maintained for years, a balance built on control, on predictability, on knowing exactly how every interaction would unfold before it began, and yet standing in front of Elena Whitmore, that certainty slipped just enough to matter, his hand still resting lightly beneath her chin, not restraining, not claiming, but grounding, as if he needed the contact to confirm what his instincts were telling him. And around them the tension in the hall grew sharper, more visible now, nobles shifting in place, exchanging uncertain glances, because this was no longer a passing curiosity. It was a deviation from expectation that none of them could explain, and the master of ceremonies cleared his throat. Quietly, a subtle attempt to guide the moment back into familiar structure. Your Majesty, he began, careful and measured. Shall we proceed with the remaining? But the words faltered, cut short not by interruption, but by the simple fact that King Lucian did not acknowledge him, did not look away from Elena, did not release the moment that had formed between them. And the silence that followed carried more authority than any spoken command, making it clear that whatever came next would not follow the script anyone had prepared. And Elena felt it too, that shift from observation to decision, from uncertainty to something far more defined, her breath steady but deeper now, as if her body was bracing for something she could not yet see. And for the first time a flicker of doubt touched her, not about who she was, but about what this moment might mean, because she had never been the center of anything before, never been the focus of a choice that could alter the course of her life so completely. And yet there was no panic in her chest, no urge to step back, only a quiet awareness that whatever happened next would be real, undeniable, impossible to ignore. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, King Lucian's expression shifted, not softer, not warmer, but clearer, as if he had reached a conclusion that no one else could yet understand. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet certainty that cut through the tension like a steady line drawn across chaos. You stand here without fear, he said, not questioning, not testing, but stating something he had already observed. And Elena felt the truth of it settle within her before she answered, because it was not entirely accurate. She did feel fear, she always had, but it did not define her, did not control her, and so she met his gaze and replied with the same quiet honesty. I am afraid, she said, her voice calm despite the confession. I just do not let it decide for me. And something in those words shifted the air again, deeper this time, more final, because it was not strength in the way the others understood it. It was not dominance or power displayed for recognition. It was something steadier, something that did not need to be proven, and King Lucian felt it resonate in a way he could not dismiss, a quiet force that did not challenge him yet refused to bend. And for a man who had spent his life surrounded by those who either sought to impress him or feared him, that difference was impossible to ignore. And slowly, deliberately, he lowered his hand from her chin, but the connection did not break. It remained in the space between them, unspoken yet undeniable. And then, without turning back toward the throne, without addressing the crowd, he took a single step to the side, positioning himself beside her rather than above her. A small movement, almost insignificant in appearance, but in a hall built on hierarchy, it shattered every expectation at once. And the reaction was immediate. A ripple of shock moving through the nobles as they understood what that gesture implied. Not dismissal, not indifference, but something far more unsettling. Something that suggested the weakest bride in the room had not only held his attention, she had changed the way he chose to Stand. The shift did not go unnoticed, not by the nobles who had spent their lives studying power, nor by the women who had entered the hall believing they understood how this night would end. And as King Lucian stood beside Elena rather than above her, the quiet tension that had been building finally broke into something sharper, whispers no longer contained, disbelief slipping into open reaction. This cannot be happening, someone breathed, while another voice, tighter with restrained frustration, added, there are others far more suitable. But the words held no weight in the space that had already changed, because the Alpha King did not move, did not correct his position, did not offer explanation, and that silence, that refusal to justify his choice, carried more authority than any declaration could have, and Elena felt the shift ripple outward from where they stood. The attention of the entire hall now fixed on her in a way it had never been before, no longer dismissive, no longer indifferent, but uncertain, questioning. And for the first time, she understood that this moment was no longer about surviving unnoticed. It was about being seen in a way that could not be undone. And the realization settled quietly within her, not overwhelming, not consuming, but steady, like the slow rise of something inevitable. And beside her, King Lucian's presence remained constant, not pressing, not demanding, but unmistakably there, a silent acknowledgement that whatever had begun between them was not something he intended to step away from. And the master of ceremonies, clearly unsettled now, attempted once more to reclaim control, his voice rising slightly as he addressed the room. Your Majesty, the selection must be formalized before the assembly, he said, careful but insistent, as if the structure of tradition could still contain what was unfolding, and for a brief moment the words lingered, the expectation hanging in the air, waiting for the king to return to the established order, to name a bride in the way it had always been done, with clarity, with distance, with finality. But King Lucian did not turn toward the crowd, did not raise his voice to address them. Instead, his gaze remained on Elena, steady and unwavering, as if the decision had already been made long before anyone else realized it. And when he finally spoke, it was not to the hall, but to her, his voice low enough that it felt personal despite the silence surrounding them. You did not come here to be chosen, he said, not accusing, not questioning, but stating something he had already understood. And Elena felt a quiet breath leave her as she answered, because there was no reason to deny it, no benefit in pretending otherwise. No, she said simply, her voice calm despite the weight of the moment. I came because I was told to. And the honesty of it, the lack of ambition, the absence of calculated desire, settled into the space between them like something rare, something that did not seek power yet could not be overlooked. And for a man who had spent his life surrounded by those who wanted something from him, that difference mattered more than anything else in the room. And slowly, deliberately, King Lucian turned at last, not away from her, but with her, positioning them side by side as he faced the gathered assembly. And the movement alone was enough to silence even the boldest voices, because it was no longer a moment of uncertainty. It was a declaration without words, a shift in alignment that no one could mistake. And the hall seemed to hold its breath once more, waiting, watching, as the Alpha King who had been impossible to predict finally made it clear that whatever choice he was about to make, it would not follow the rules they had all expected. And standing beside him, Elena did not shrink, did not falter, because for the first time in her life, she was not trying to disappear, she was simply standing where she was meant to be. The hall remained suspended in that fragile silence, as if the world itself had paused to witness what no one had prepared for. And when King Lucian finally faced the assembly fully, his presence carried a quiet finality that settled over the room like a closing door, the kind that did not slam, yet could not be reopened once shut. And the nobles, the brides, the council members who had spent their lives navigating power through tradition and expectation all seemed to understand at once that whatever came next would not be undone by objection or disbelief. And still, disbelief lingered, visible in the tight expressions, the rigid posture of those who had expected certainty and now faced something entirely different. And Elena felt it all, the weight of their attention, the shift from dismissal to scrutiny, from amusement to unease. But she did not step back, did not let their gaze reshape her into something smaller, because standing beside him had changed something within her, not in the sense of power gained, but in the quiet recognition that she no longer needed to prove her place. She only needed to stand in it. And beside her, King Lucian's voice broke the silence at last, not raised, not forced, but clear enough to reach every corner of the grand hall. "This gathering was called so that I may choose," he said, his tone steady, measured, yet carrying a weight that demanded attention without effort, and a ripple moved through the crowd. A collective breath drawn as the moment they had all anticipated finally arrived. But there was hesitation in it now, uncertainty where there had once been confidence, because they no longer knew what choice would be made. And King Lucian did not rush the moment, did not offer explanation or justification. Instead, he let the silence stretch just long enough for every expectation to rise and settle, to be felt fully before it was broken, and then, without turning away from Elena, without stepping back into the distance that tradition would have required, he continued, "Many stand here with strength, with lineage, with everything this court has been taught to value." And there was no denial in his words, no dismissal of those who had come prepared to be chosen, but there was something else beneath it, something that shifted the meaning of what he said next. "But those things are easy to see," and the implication settled slowly, like a truth that had always existed but had rarely been acknowledged. And Elena felt it before she understood it fully, the way his words were not directed at the crowd, but grounded in the quiet space between them. And then he turned his head slightly, just enough to look at her again, not for permission, not for confirmation, but because whatever choice he was about to speak had already been decided in that moment of connection they had shared. And when he spoke her name, it was not loud, not declared with force, but it carried through the hall with an undeniable clarity that left no room for doubt. Elena Whitmore. And the reaction was immediate, not loud, not chaotic, but sharp, a collective shift in the room as the truth of his choice settled into every mind present. And before any voice could rise in protest, before any challenge could take shape, he continued, his voice steady and unyielding, "Is the one I choose." And there it was, simple, direct, without ornament or hesitation, a decision that did not ask for approval, did not seek validation, but existed entirely on its own authority. And the silence that followed was deeper than anything that had come before, because this was no longer uncertainty, it was finality, and Elena felt the words settle around her, not like a weight, but like a shift in gravity itself, pulling her into a reality she had never imagined. And yet even then, even as the room struggled to understand what had just happened, King Lucian was not finished, because his gaze remained on her, steady and certain, and when he spoke again, his voice carried something new, something quieter but far more personal. "Not because you asked," he said, "and not because you tried." And for a brief moment the meaning hung there, unfinished, until he completed it with a truth that echoed far beyond the walls of the hall. "But because I could not ignore you." And in that moment, the world they had all known shifted completely, because the weakest bride in the room had not been chosen out of duty or obligation. She had been chosen because she was the only one he could not turn away from. The words settled over the hall with a weight that no one could dismiss, not because they were loud or forceful, but because they were undeniable, and for a moment no one moved, no one spoke, as if the entire room had been stripped of the ability to respond, and Elena stood there. Beside him, her name still echoing in the silence, her heartbeat steady but deeper now, as if each pulse carried the realization further into her. This was real, this was happening, and yet it did not feel like the overwhelming rush she might have expected. It felt quiet, almost still, like the moment just before a storm breaks when everything holds its breath. And across the hall, the first reaction finally came, not from the crowd as a whole, but from a single voice that could no longer remain silent. "Your Majesty." A noblewoman stepped forward slightly, her composure carefully maintained though the tension beneath it was clear. "Surely this is unexpected." And the word lingered, chosen with care, avoiding direct challenge while still carrying the weight of objection, and a few others shifted in agreement, their silence no longer as absolute as it had been, because disbelief demanded acknowledgement. And yet King Lucian did not react with irritation, did not silence her with force or command. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the speaker, calm, steady, and entirely unmoved by the undercurrent of resistance. "It is," he said simply, his voice even, unshaken. And that was all. No apology, no explanation, just the quiet confirmation that he was fully aware of the break from expectation and had chosen it regardless. And the effect was immediate, because there was nothing left to argue against, nothing left to question without stepping into open defiance. And that was a line no one in the room was willing to cross. And the noblewoman lowered her gaze, stepping back into place as the tension shifted once more, not gone, but contained, forced back beneath the surface by the undeniable authority of his decision. And beside him, Elena felt the weight of that moment settle into something clearer, something more defined, because this was not just a choice spoken into existence. It was a choice being held, maintained against the quiet resistance of an entire room. And that realization changed something within her, not in a way that made her feel powerful, but in a way that made her understand the gravity of where she stood. And slowly, as if acknowledging that the moment could not remain suspended forever, King Lucian turned back toward her, his expression unchanged yet carrying something deeper now, something that reflected the decision he had already made. And without hesitation, without ceremony, he extended his hand toward her, not as a demand, not as a command, but as an invitation, simple and clear. And Elena felt the weight of every gaze in the room return to her, felt the silent question hanging in the air. Would she accept? Would she step forward into something she had never sought, something that would change everything? And for a brief moment, time seemed to stretch again, the space between his hand and hers holding more significance than any words that had been spoken. And then, quietly, steadily, she moved, lifting her hand to meet his, her fingers resting against his palm with a calm that surprised even her. And the contact was not dramatic, not overwhelming, but it carried a certainty that settled into the space between them like something that had always been waiting to happen. And as their hands met, the hall seemed to exhale, the moment no longer suspended but set into motion, irreversible. And King Lucian did not release her, did not step back. Instead, he turned slightly, guiding her with him not away from the assembly, but forward, through it. And the meaning was clear to everyone present. This was not a temporary choice, not a fleeting decision. It was a path, one he had already begun to walk. And Elena, who had spent her life trying to remain unseen, found herself moving beside him without hesitation, not because she understood everything that lay ahead, but because for the first time, she did not feel the need to turn away from it. The doors of the grand hall opened slowly as King Lucian guided Elena forward, not with urgency, not with force, but with a quiet certainty that made every step feel deliberate. And the sound of their footsteps against the polished floor echoed softly in the vast space behind them, a steady rhythm that marked the end of one moment and the beginning of something no one in that room had anticipated. And though the crowd remained silent, their presence did not fade. Their attention followed, heavy and unblinking, because what they had witnessed could not be undone, could not be dismissed as a passing curiosity. It was a shift in the very order they had always believed unshakable. And Elena felt it all, the weight of their eyes, the quiet disbelief that still lingered in the air. But for the first time, it did not press her down, it did not make her smaller, because as she walked beside him, she was no longer trying to disappear. She was simply moving forward, one step at a time, into a future she had never imagined yet somehow did not fear. And when they reached the threshold of the hall, King Lucian paused, not turning back, not addressing the assembly again, but allowing the moment to settle fully before it was left behind. And for a brief second, Elena glanced over her shoulder, her gaze sweeping across the room that had once felt overwhelming, filled with voices that had reduced her to something lesser, and now stood silent, uncertain, as if they were seeing her for the first time without the weight of their assumptions. And something within her shifted quietly, not triumph, not pride, but a calm understanding that she had not changed who she was, only the way the world had chosen to see her. And when she turned back, King Lucian was already watching her, his expression unreadable yet steady, as if he had been waiting for that moment. And there was no question in his gaze, no doubt, only a quiet acknowledgement of the path they had stepped onto together. And as they moved beyond the doors, into the dimly lit corridor where the noise of the hall finally faded into distant silence, the atmosphere changed, the tension of the crowd replaced by something calmer, more grounded, and Elena let out a breath she had not realized she had been holding, her shoulders easing just slightly. Though her hand remained in his, the contact still steady, still certain. And for a moment neither of them spoke, because there was no need to fill the silence with words that could not yet capture what had happened. But eventually, King Lucian slowed his steps, turning slightly toward her, not releasing her hand, not stepping away, but allowing the space between them to shift into something more personal, more real. And when he spoke, his voice was quieter now, no longer carrying across a hall, but meant only for her. "You are not what they believed," he said, not as praise, not as surprise, but as a simple truth he had already accepted. And Elena met his gaze, her expression calm, thoughtful, because she understood that those words were not about the others, they were about him, about what he had seen when no one else had looked closely enough to notice. And after a brief pause, she answered in the same quiet tone, "I never was." And the honesty of it settled between them, steady and unshaken. And for the first time since the night began, something almost like a faint smile touched the edge of his expression, not wide, not obvious, but enough to shift the intensity of his gaze into something softer, something that carried the weight of recognition rather than scrutiny. And as they stood there, just beyond the reach of the world that had tried to define her, Elena realized that nothing about her had changed. She was still the same girl who had been mocked, still the same person who had chosen kindness when no one was watching. But the difference now was undeniable, because she was no longer standing alone